Okay, so the second piece of chapter 2 is the franchise, or franchises. So when we think about the franchise, you probably have McDonald's or some restaurant. Burger King comes to mind, and it is that, but it's a bit broader than that. So let's spend the next few moments discussing the franchise. All right, and so I always caution um, my classes when we talk about franchises because the franchise is not an entity. All right, it's not an entity. It's a business model, and the text doesn't always make that clear because oftentimes it's presented as sole proprietorship, partnership, franchise, um, which is not exactly accurate. The franchise is a business model. It is buying an established business model and using it. So if I purchase a franchise, I still have to have an entity to hold that franchise, and typically it's going to be an LLC, which we haven't talked about, but we will. But for sake of argument, it could be a sole proprietorship. Granted, some franchisors do not allow sole proprietorships to purchase franchisees. In fact, most of your fast food ones do not, but just for the sake of argument. It could be a partnership, it could be a corporation, but the franchise itself is a business model where you buy the intellectual property and the established business model, the established business practices of it usually a successful company. All right. So terminology. So the franchise is the actual agreement. So it's a contract. All right. Between the franchisee, which is the person buying into the business model, and the franchisor, which is the seller of the business model. All right. And so to be clear, the franchisor, like an example for McDonald's. McDonald's is the franchisor, and if you're in a location of McDonald's, the owner of that particular location is the franchisee. Okay, so franchises actually come in 3 different types. And we've talked about the chain style, so let's talk about that. Your fast food operations or chain style business operations. And the way it works is you buy in and operate the business. And the franchisor takes an ongoing royalty. And it varies from entity to entity. For instance, the royalty for Subway, I believe, is somewhere in the 7 or 8% range, whereas the ongoing royalty and royalties are on revenues, right? So the ongoing royalty for McDonald's, I believe, is around 2%, 2.5%. I've got a few other examples here. Subway. When you really study franchise law, it's difficult not to come back to Subway because Subway is an example of kind of pro-franchisor, a pro-franchisor type of franchise that tends to benefit the franchisor more than it does the franchisee. And for reasons that I'll get into. And I'll probably link a few articles as well. Best Western hotels, and I like to throw that in there because not every chain style business is fast food or restaurant or food service, right? Best Western hotels, if I want to form a hotel, if I want to own a hotel, I can build one to Best Western standards, right? And then engage as a franchisee for Best Western. All right, and many hotels are that way, and it actually works out that usually your lower end hotels are often franchised that way, and the higher end higher end hotels are often owned by the hotel chain itself. So, for instance, commonly franchised Best Westerns, Holiday Inns, Motel 6s, Super 8s. You're at the other end of the lodging spectrum. Your Ritz-Carltons and your Four Seasons and your Intercontinentals are not franchised. They're owned by the company itself. Two different approaches. Distributorship. All right. This is the manufacturer is the franchisor, and the dealer is the franchisee. So obviously, the most visible distributorships are the automobile dealerships. All right. Your GMC or your Dodge Ram dealerships. Those are distributorships. So the franchise agreement allows the dealer to sell products, in this case vehicles, through manufactured by the distributor. And this is an interesting area of law because in many states it's actually illegal for auto manufacturers, to sell vehicles directly. There still are several states where it is illegal for Tesla manufacturing to sell vehicles, since they don't use distributorships. They sell their vehicles directly. All right, so if you see a Tesla dealership, it is owned by Tesla. All right, it is not a franchise location, and the employees are Tesla employees. Right. So for that reason, in several states, you just can't buy Teslas. You have to go across state lines and then bring them back and register them. I think New Jersey and Texas may not be anymore, but that's the auto dealership. At the other end of the spectrum, Mary Kay or Avon. All right. So if you've ever used a Mary Kay product or an Avon product, you know that they're purchased through your local representative. All right, which means that basically the representative is the franchisee. They have the ability to purchase product from Mary Kay or Avon at set prices and then sell to the consumer for honestly whatever price they want. But the idea is they sell for more than they purchase for, and that's their business. That's the franchise. All right. Manufacturing arrangement. All right. So this is different than the distributorship because the franchise in the manufacturing arrangement allows the franchisor to license usually a patented or protected process to the franchisee, and the franchisee actually manufactures and sells the product. So obviously the 800-pound gorilla of this process is Coca-Cola bottlers, right? Coca-Cola does not manufacture Coke. Coca-Cola Enterprises does, which is the largest bottler of Coca-Cola products, not the exclusive, but the largest. And so that's that franchise, right? Coca-Cola develops new products, they market the products, and they license the production thereof to their established bottlers. All right. Roasted chicken. All right, and if you haven't heard of this, this is regional. I haven't seen it much in this region, but in Pennsylvania, Northern Maryland, there's a thing called roasted chicken, and it typically with most chicken, with most actually recipes or food items, they are particular to one particular chain. For instance, Big Mac. If I say Big Mac, you know you don't go to Burger King to get that. You get it at McDonald's, and vice versa for the Whopper, right? Roasted chicken is a little different, right? It's basically fried chicken, um, cooked a certain way, but it is a franchised item. And what you'll find in South Central Pennsylvania is that you can get roasted chicken at competing restaurants. You know, kind of like your diners will serve it. Um, a blue plate special or things like that. And I'm making names up, but Mike's Diner has a roasted chicken franchise, and in their window you'll see roasted chicken sold here, right? And then, a mile away, um, Jill's Diner has the exact same roasted chicken. And that's because the franchise is buying into the process, and it's a special fryer, it's a special seasoning process, and then manufacturing and marketing and selling that chicken. So that's another example of a manufacturing arrangement as a franchise. All right, so let's talk about regulation. So franchises are primarily regulated federally. Most states also regulate franchises. But of course, federal regulation is appropriate when the franchise affects commerce among the states, i.e. interstate commerce. And we've talked previously in previous lectures, that's a very low bar. So primarily, this is under the purview of the federal government. All right. So if you've ever been in a location, sometimes on napkins or on cups at fast food restaurants, you'll see, would you like to be a franchisee? Call this number or go to this website. And when you do so, one of the things that's made available to you is a franchise disclosure document, or FDD. Right? And that's a document that contains all of the disclosures relevant in purchasing a franchise. And I actually have several of these, just often for curiosity. I have Subways because Subway is very interesting process, and it's about 600 or 700 pages of disclosures that you need to read through and be familiar with prior to establishment of your franchise. All right. And the types of things in the franchise disclosure document are the types of fees that are associated. Is there an initial franchise fee? And these vary from, 15,000, I believe, or 10,000. And the numbers change periodically, but that used to be what it took to basically to sign the contract to start a Subway. And they run the gamut. For instance, Krispy Kreme has a $250,000 initial franchise fee, $250,000. And there's nothing really making the franchisee use that franchise fee for anything in particular, but most franchises do use that initial franchise fee for startup training, startup materials, particular ovens, outfitting locations, are the costs that are necessary to get a franchise up and running. Right? It doesn't have to be used for that, but oftentimes it is. So sometimes it doesn't go directly to the bottom line of the franchisor. Right? And then you have your ongoing royalty, which I referenced previously. It's just a percentage of revenue, not income, not profit, but revenue paid by the franchisee to the franchisor. All right. And this is, for most franchises, this is the primary means of revenue. All right. at least from their franchising piece. So the terms of the franchise agreement. Well, I reference the franchise as a contract. All right. So that means it's governed under contract law. Most would be common law, contract law. All right. In some instances, or some clauses, the franchisor is also selling goods or supplies to be used in the operation of the franchise. And in that case, obviously, the UCC would be applicable since it would be a sale of goods. All right, so these are the applicable sources of law to the franchise contract. So, one downside of the franchise is you have less control over your own business. For instance, if I'm operating a Subway restaurant location and I make a great fried bologna sandwich, let's say, for sake of illustration, right? Well, I can't sell that sandwich in my Subway, right? It would be a violation of my franchise agreement. All right, I have to use the menu prescribed by Subway. All right. To that end, virtually every franchise has some form of quality control. If I'm selling my business model, I have a vested interest in making sure that the customer experience is a positive one. All right. And so I have the ability to, typically for fast food or chain style, I have the ability to show up in a location, disclosed or undisclosed, to inspect, sample the product, and if I find anything not up to snuff or in violation of the franchise agreement, I have options available. Anything from fines to terminating the franchise agreement. All right, and so when a franchise agreement is terminated, that's a bad day at the office, right? Because the franchisee's business that they put a lot of money and effort into is now gone, right? And for that reason, terminations always end in litigation, right? So it's a double-edged sword. If I'm a franchisor intending to terminate a franchise, it has to be done in good faith because I know I'm going to be sued. So I have to terminate planning on being sued and making sure that everything that I do, it will stand up in court, because you're going to end up being sued. It's just you're taking somebody's investment, and it's not cheap to get a franchise going. I mean, they run the gamut in fast food from you can start typically a Subway for around $100,000 to the other end of the spectrum. McDonald's are typically expensive to start and can take up to upwards of $2 million to get going, depending upon where you're at and everything. Franchisors have to terminate in good faith. It can't be because I have determined that this location is actually very profitable and I want to open a corporate-owned franchise right next door, so I'm going to terminate the existing franchise. You can't do it that way. That would be illegal. Well, it wouldn't be good faith, and it would be actionable in court. Wrongful termination is an intentional tort, so think of your intentional torts, and wrongful termination is one.